The night a stranger offered half a kingdom for one evening changed everything. A black carriage rolled through dust and judgment, carrying a woman wrapped in silk and secrets. She stopped at a dying ranch where a widower fought to keep his daughter fed and made an offer that should have been salvation: 500 acres of prime land for one night in his home. But some transactions cost more than money. Some choices break you or remake you. This is a story about what happens when desperation meets dignity, when wealth confronts loneliness, and when the past you've buried comes back wearing the face of your only future. Stay with me until the end. Hit like and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun didn't set over the Thorn Ranch anymore. It just gave up and bled out across the horizon, leaving everything the color of old bruises. Caleb Thorne stood on his porch, with splinters working their way into his palms from the railing he'd been meaning to replace for 3 months. The wood was rotting. Everything was rotting. The fence posts leaned like drunk men. The barn door hung crooked on rusted hinges that screamed every time the wind picked up. Even the land itself looked tired, cracked earth stretching out toward hills that used to mean something back when his father worked them. 7 years since Rebecca died. 7 years of watching everything she'd loved about this place fall apart one piece at a time. "Papa, Mr. Chen says we owe him for last month, too." Caleb turned. His daughter Sarah stood in the doorway, 10 years old and already learning to deliver bad news with her mother's straight shoulders. She had Rebecca's dark hair and his own gray eyes, and sometimes when she stood a certain way in the light, it hurt to look at her. "I know, sweetheart. He says if we don't pay by Saturday, he won't give us any more flour." "I know." She was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her dress. The dress was too small now, hem riding up above her ankles. He'd let it out twice already. Pretty soon there'd be nothing left to let out. "Are we going to be okay?" Her voice was small. Caleb crossed the porch and knelt down so they were eye to eye. He wanted to lie to her. God, he wanted to tell her everything would be fine, the way fathers were supposed to. But Rebecca had made him promise, in those last fever-bright days before the end, that he'd never lie to their daughter, not about the things that mattered. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm working on it." Sarah nodded, solemn as a judge. "Okay." She went back inside and Caleb stayed on his knees for a moment longer, staring at the weathered boards beneath him. Working on it. What a joke. He'd sold off half the herd last month just to keep the bank from taking the house. The remaining cattle were thin, ribs showing through their hides because the grazing land was shot, and he couldn't afford decent feed. He'd let 2 of his 3 ranch hands go. The last one, old Tom Birch, was working half-time for quarter pay just because he didn't have anywhere else to go. The numbers didn't work anymore. They hadn't worked for a while. Caleb had been shuffling debts around like a con man with 3 shells and a pea, hoping something would change. But nothing changed. The land stayed dry. The cattle stayed thin. The bills kept coming. He pushed himself up, joints cracking, and walked to the edge of the porch. 32 years old, and he felt 50. The sunset was almost done now, last light clinging to the edges of the world like it was afraid of what came next. That's when he saw the dust. At first he thought it was just wind kicking up dirt from the road, but then he realized the dust was moving too deliberately, following the main track that ran from town past his property. Someone was coming. Caleb squinted against the glare. A carriage. Black. Pulled by 4 horses moving at a steady clip despite the heat. Nobody came out here anymore unless they were bringing bad news. Caleb stepped off the porch and walked toward the fence line, watching the carriage grow larger. It was fine work, that carriage. Lacquered wood that caught the dying light. Brass fittings that gleamed even under all that dust. The kind of vehicle that cost more than most people made in 5 years. The kind that didn't belong on a frontier road leading to a half-dead ranch. The carriage slowed as it approached, then stopped about 20 yards from where Caleb stood. For a long moment, nothing happened. The horses stamped and snorted. Dust settled. Then the driver, a Chinese man in a dark suit that looked completely impractical for the heat, climbed down and opened the passenger door. A woman stepped out. Caleb had seen plenty of wealthy people pass through town over the years. Railroad men in their fine coats. Eastern investors with their pocket watches and practiced smiles. But this woman was something different. She wore black silk that moved like water, fitted close at the shoulders and falling in careful folds to the ground. Her face was pale, smooth, features that belonged in a painting rather than standing in the dust of a dying ranch. Her hair was pulled back in an elaborate arrangement that must have taken an hour to pin in place. She looked at him with dark eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was soft, accented, precise. "That's right. My name is Lian Hua Wei. May I speak with you?" Caleb glanced at the carriage, at the driver standing silent beside it, at this woman who'd appeared out of nowhere like something from a dream. "You're speaking." "I meant privately. Inside, perhaps." Every instinct told him to say no. Wealthy strangers didn't show up at your door with good intentions. They showed up with contracts that seemed reasonable until you read the fine print. They showed up with offers that came with hooks buried so deep you didn't feel them until it was too late. But he was 30 days from losing everything, and desperate men didn't have the luxury of listening to their instincts. "All right," he said, "come on." He led her to the house, acutely aware of every broken thing she had to see on the way. The sagging fence, the weeds growing up through the path, the porch steps that creaked under their weight. Inside was worse, furniture that had been good quality once but was now just old, curtains faded by sun and time, Sarah's attempt at tidying up visible in the way things were stacked neatly even though everything was worn through. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, eyes going wide at the sight of their visitor. "Sarah, this is Mrs. Wei. She's here to talk business. Why don't you go check on the chickens?" "We checked them an hour ago. Check them again." Sarah shot him a look that said she knew exactly what he was doing, but she went. The door closed behind her, leaving Caleb alone with this stranger who'd brought her wealth and her silence into his home. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the better of his two chairs. Lian Huawei sat with the kind of posture that came from practice, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Caleb took the other chair, feeling like he was sitting for a portrait. Everything about her was measured, controlled. She looked around the room with those unreadable eyes, and he wondered what she saw. Poverty, probably. Failure. A man circling the drain. "I'll get to the point, Mr. Thorne." Her voice remained soft, but there was steel underneath. "I own approximately 30,000 acres north of here, purchased over the past 18 months through various intermediaries." Caleb kept his face neutral, but his mind was racing. 30,000 acres. The old Morrison spread, the Dakota Flats, the entire Eastern Valley. Someone had been buying up land for over a year and nobody knew who was behind it. "I'm in the process of consolidating my holdings," she continued. "Your property sits adjacent to mine. 500 acres of grazing land with water access and a direct route to the main road. I want to purchase it." There it was, the offer, the hook. "It's not for sale." "Everything is for sale, Mr. Thorne. It's simply a matter of price." She wasn't wrong. Caleb had learned that lesson the hard way. Still, hearing it stated so plainly, so matter-of-factly, made something hot flare in his chest. "What are you offering?" Lian Huawei reached into a small silk bag she'd brought with her and withdrew a piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully and placed it on the small table between them. Caleb leaned forward to read. The number at the bottom made his vision blur at the edges. It was more than the ranch was worth, more than he owed, more than he'd make in 10 years of good harvests, and there hadn't been a good harvest in this valley since before Sarah was born. It was enough to buy a new place somewhere else, enough to start over, enough to give his daughter a future that didn't involve watching everything crumble. It was enough to save them. "That's generous," he managed. "I'm not a generous person, Mr. Thorne. I'm a practical one. That land is worth more to me as part of a larger holding than it is to you as a failing ranch. The price reflects reality." The hot thing in his chest burned hotter. She wasn't being cruel, which somehow made it worse. She was just stating facts. His ranch was failing. Everyone knew it. The whole town watched him struggle and pretended not to notice. "There's a condition," Lianhua said. "Of course there was. I want one night in this house, alone with you, no one else present. Tomorrow evening, from sunset until dawn." The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb stared at her, trying to process what he'd just heard. "What? You heard me correctly? I don't... Why would you..." He stopped, started again. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think you're buying. I'm not buying anything beyond what I stated. One night in your home, we share a meal. We talk. That's all. That's all. Caleb stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the confusion and anger building in his chest. You show up here, offer me more money than most people see in a lifetime, and all you want is to spend one night having dinner and conversation? Yes? Why? For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not quite emotion, but a crack in the perfect mask. My reasons are my own. Your reasons involve me. That makes them my business. Lianhua Wei was quiet for a moment, studying him with those dark eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm looking for something I haven't found in other places. I believe I might find it here. And what exactly are you looking for? Honesty. The word sat between them, strange and out of place. Caleb wanted to laugh. Honesty. She was offering him a fortune for one night in his home and talking about honesty like it meant something. You realize what people will say, he said quietly. A widow and a widower, alone together all night. Doesn't matter what actually happens. They'll talk. Do you care what they say? Did he? Caleb thought about the people in town, the ones who'd stopped meeting his eyes at church, the ones who smiled with pity when they saw Sarah in her too small dress, the ones who'd known his family for 3 generations and still looked at him like he was something broken. Yeah, he said, I care, but more for Sarah than for me. Your daughter would be taken care of. She could stay with someone you trust for the night. That's not what I mean. If I do this, if I take your money and let you... He gestured vaguely at the room, at the situation he couldn't quite define. People will remember. They'll treat her different. Kids will say things. Hell, adults will say things. Children are cruel regardless. At least she'd have a future. She wasn't wrong about that either. Kids in town already whispered about Sarah Thorne, whose father couldn't provide, whose clothes didn't fit, who'd probably end up working as someone's maid before she was 15. This money would change that. This money would change everything. But it would also confirm every ugly thing they already thought about her father. I need to think about it, Caleb said. Of course. Lianhua Wei stood, smooth and graceful. I'll be staying at the hotel in town. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. She moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Thorne, may I ask you a question? Seems only fair. Do you love your daughter? Question hit him sideways. What kind of... Yes, of course I do. Then consider what love requires. Sometimes it requires sacrifice. Sometimes it requires setting aside pride. She looked at him steadily. Sometimes it requires accepting help from strangers, even when you don't understand why they're offering. She left then, silk rustling, footsteps silent on his worn floor. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Through the window, Caleb watched her climb back into that black carriage, watched the driver snap the reins, watched the whole impossible scene disappear back down the road in a cloud of dust. He stood there until the dust settled and the night came on for real, trying to figure out what had just happened. Sarah came back inside, chickens apparently checked to her satisfaction. Who was that? Someone interested in buying the ranch. Are we going to sell? Caleb looked at his daughter, really looked at her. The dress that didn't fit, the shoes he'd already resold twice, the face that was trying so hard to be brave even though she was 10 years old and shouldn't have to be brave about things like flower bills and bank notices. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But he was lying, and they both knew it. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows from the moon crawl across cracked plaster. Rebecca had wanted to repaint this room. She'd picked out a color, something warm and golden. He'd promised he'd do it after the fall harvest. That was 8 years ago. Beside him, the space where she used to sleep felt vast. He'd thought about getting rid of the bed, buying something smaller, something that didn't remind him every night that he was alone. But he'd kept it. Some stupid part of him wanted to preserve everything exactly as it was the last time she'd been here. Like if he changed too much, he'd lose even the memory of what they'd had. He turned onto his side, punched the pillow, tried to find a position that would let his mind quiet down. It didn't work. The offer kept circling through his thoughts. The money, the condition, that woman with her silk and her secrets, sitting in his house like she belonged there, talking about honesty while making the most dishonest proposition he'd ever heard. Except, was it dishonest? She'd been clear about what she wanted. One night, dinner and conversation. She hadn't tried to dress it up as anything else. If anything, she'd been more honest than most people Caleb dealt with. The bank manager who smiled while explaining the foreclosure process. The feed store owner who said he trusted Caleb for credit while writing down every penny. The neighbors who asked how he was doing while their eyes counted up all his failures. At least Lian Huawei didn't pretend. But still. One night, with a strange woman in his home, door closed to the world, while his daughter stayed somewhere else. The whole thing felt wrong. Felt like selling something that shouldn't be for sale, even if he couldn't quite name what that something was. Pride, maybe? Dignity. The idea that a man should be able to provide for his family without compromising whatever the hell this would compromise. But what was pride worth when you couldn't feed your daughter? Caleb sat up, gave up on sleep. He pulled on his pants and shirt and walked barefoot through the house, checking on Sarah out of habit. She was asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. Rebecca used to sleep the same way. He stood in the doorway watching her breathe, this small person who depended on him to make the right choice. What was the right choice? He moved to the kitchen, thought about making coffee, decided against it. Instead, he went out onto the porch and sat on the steps, letting the night air cool his skin. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows, bright enough to see the fence posts leaning, the barn door crooked, the land stretching out tired and used up. His father had built this place from nothing, cleared the land, put up the first fence, dug the well by hand over the course of 2 summers. He'd done it all to leave something for his son, something solid, something that mattered. And Caleb had let it all fall apart, not on purpose, not through laziness or drink or any of the usual ways men destroyed what their fathers built. Just through bad luck and bad timing and the simple fact that sometimes the land stopped giving no matter how hard you worked it. But intention didn't matter much when you were 30 days from losing everything. Footsteps on gravel made him turn. Tom Birch emerged from the darkness, walking with the careful steps of a man who'd been drinking but wasn't quite drunk yet. He sat down on the steps beside Caleb without being invited. "Can't sleep either?" Tom asked. Something like that. They sat in silence for a while. Tom was 60-something, weathered as old leather, no family left living. He'd worked for Caleb's father, and then for Caleb, and he'd seen the whole slow decline. If anyone understood how bad things had gotten, it was Tom. "Saw that carriage today," Tom said finally. "Fancy rig." "Yeah." "Chinese woman, they're saying in town. Owns half the valley now. Nobody knows where she got the money. She made me an offer on the place." Tom was quiet for a beat. "Good offer?" "Very good. Then what are you doing out here looking miserable about it?" Caleb laughed, short and bitter. "She wants something in exchange, something that'll make every gossip in 3 counties work overtime." "Ah." Tom pulled out a flask, took a sip, offered it to Caleb. Caleb shook his head. "What's she want?" "One night, here. Just the 2 of us." Tom whistled low. "That's a hell of a condition. She says it's just for dinner and conversation." "And you believe her?" Did he? Caleb thought about those dark eyes, that careful posture, the way she'd spoken about honesty like it was something rare and valuable. "I don't know, maybe. But it doesn't matter what actually happens. It matters what people will think happened. People already think plenty. You worried about adding to the list?" "I'm worried about Sarah. What they'll say about her. What they'll say to her." Tom took another sip, screwed the cap back on his flask. "Kids are tough. Tougher than we give them credit for. And hell, Caleb, you take that money. You can move somewhere new. Somewhere nobody knows your business. Start fresh." "Run away, you mean? Call it whatever you want. But staying here out of pride while your daughter goes hungry? That ain't noble. That's just stupid." Caleb wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Tom was right. Pride was a luxury. He couldn't afford it anymore. "What would you do?" Caleb asked. "If you were me?" Tom was quiet for a long time, staring out at the moonlit land. "I'd take the deal. I'd hate myself for it, probably. But I'd take it. Because at the end of the day, keeping your daughter safe matters more than keeping your reputation clean. Even if it means becoming exactly what everyone already thinks I am. Everyone already thinks you're broke and desperate. At least this way you'd be broke and desperate with enough money to stop being broke." It wasn't comfort, but it was something close to logic, cold logic, the kind that left no room for feelings or second thoughts. Caleb stood up, brushing dust from his pants. I should try to get some sleep. You gonna take it? I don't know yet. But he did know. He'd known since the moment Lian Huawei put that number in front of him. He'd just been hoping there was some other option, some way out that didn't require him to compromise. But there wasn't. There never had been. Thanks, Tom. Anytime, boss. Caleb went back inside, back to the bed that was too big, back to staring at the ceiling. This time, though, his mind wasn't circling. It had landed on a decision, and even though that decision sat in his stomach like spoiled meat, at least it was made. He'd take the offer, he'd survive, and he'd figure out how to live with himself after. Morning came too fast and too bright. Caleb woke with his decision still sitting heavy in his chest, got dressed, made breakfast for Sarah. Eggs and bread, same as always. She ate quietly, watching him with those two perceptive eyes. You're going to sell the ranch, she said. Not a question. Probably. Where will we go? Don't know yet. Somewhere with better land, maybe closer to a bigger town. Will it be nice? Caleb looked at his daughter across the table. She was trying so hard to sound optimistic, to be okay with the idea of leaving the only home she'd ever known. It broke something in him. Yeah, sweetheart, it'll be nice. After breakfast, he saddled up the old mare and rode into town. The morning was already hot, sun beating down on dusty streets, making everything shimmer. The town of Redemption, ironic name for a place where nobody seemed to find much redemption, was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business. Small enough that Caleb could feel eyes on him as he rode down Main Street toward the hotel. The hotel was the nicest building in town, which wasn't saying much. 2 stories, whitewashed, with a porch that sagged only a little. Caleb tied up the mare and went inside. The desk clerk, a thin man named Porter, who'd gone to school with Caleb's father, looked up from his newspaper. Help you? I need to speak with Mrs. Wei. Something flickered in Porter's eyes. Curiosity. Maybe judgment. Hard to tell. Room 8, upstairs. Caleb climbed the stairs, each step feeling like walking toward the edge of something he couldn't see the bottom of. He found room 8 and knocked. Come in. He opened the door. Lian Huawei sat by the window, still dressed in black, reading a leather-bound book. The room was sparse but clean, and she'd added nothing personal to it. No belongings scattered about. No signs that anyone actually lived here. It was like she was passing through, temporary, already gone. She looked up as he entered. Mr. Thorne, I didn't expect you so early. I'm accepting your offer. I see. She closed her book, set it aside. The full terms? Yes. If she felt any satisfaction, she didn't show it, just nodded, like he'd confirmed something she already knew. When would be convenient? Tonight. I'll need to arrange for Sarah to stay with Tom Birch. He's my ranch hand. Good man. She'll be safe there. Of course. Shall we say sunset? Sunset. There should have been more to say. Terms to discuss. Details to work out. But Caleb found he didn't have the words. He'd made his choice. Everything else was just logistics. He turned to leave, then stopped. Can I ask you something? Yes? Why me? Why this place? You could buy better land, better houses. Why here? Lian Huawei was quiet for a moment, and again that crack appeared in her mask. Something almost human underneath. Because you're the first person I've met in this country who looked at my money and didn't immediately smile. I'm not sure that's a good reason. It's the only reason I have. Caleb left then, before he could talk himself out of the whole thing. He rode back to the ranch, feeling like he was watching himself from a distance, like this was happening to someone else. The rest of the day passed in a blur. He told Sarah she'd be staying with Tom for the night. She asked why. He didn't have a good answer, so he told her he had business to attend to. She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. He cleaned the house, which felt absurd but necessary, swept the floors, wiped down the table, tried to make the place look less like poverty and more like a home where someone might want to spend an evening. Tom came by around 4 to pick up Sarah. She hugged Caleb goodbye and he held her maybe a little too long. You sure about this? Tom asked quietly while Sarah was getting her things. No. But you're doing it anyway. Yeah. Tom nodded. See you tomorrow, boss. They left and Caleb was alone. He had a few hours before sunset. He spent them mostly staring at nothing, trying to figure out what he was supposed to say to a wealthy stranger who'd bought her way into his evening, trying to figure out who he was now that he'd said yes to this. The sun started its descent, painting everything gold and red. Caleb changed into his one good shirt, the one he wore to church on the rare occasions he went. He combed his hair, washed his face, stared at himself in the cracked mirror over the wash basin, and barely recognized the man looking back. When had he gotten so tired? When had the lines around his eyes gotten so deep? Hoofbeats outside. The black carriage, right on time. Caleb went to the door, opened it. Lian Huawei stepped down from the carriage, still in black, still perfect. The driver handed her a basket, then climbed back up and drove away. She walked to the porch, and for a moment they just stood there, this strange woman and this desperate man, neither quite sure what came next. "May I come in?" she asked. Caleb stepped aside. "It's your night. You paid for it." She flinched, just barely, just for a second, but he saw it. "I didn't pay for anything, Mr. Thorne. I made an offer. You accepted. There's a difference." "Is there?" She walked past him into the house, setting the basket on the table. "Yes. One implies transaction. The other implies choice. Feels like the same thing when you're broke." Lianhua turned to face him, and something in her expression had shifted, less controlled, more real. "You're angry. I'm a lot of things. Angry's on the list." "At me?" "At the situation. At myself for being in it. At you for—" He gestured vaguely. "Whatever this is." "This is dinner, Mr. Thorne, that's all. I brought food. I thought we might share it and talk. That's the extent of my expectation." "Why?" "I told you." "No, not the answer you gave me this morning, the real one. Why are you really here?" Lian Huawei was silent for a long moment, and Caleb watched something work its way across her face, a decision being made. Then she spoke, and her voice was quieter than before, softer. "Because I'm lonely," she said, "and I thought maybe you were too." The words hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. All day he'd been building up armor, preparing for manipulation or games or something he could fight against. But this simple, brutal honesty, he had no defense for. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I am." She nodded. "Then let's be lonely together for one evening. No expectations, no judgment, just two people sharing a meal." And somehow, impossibly, that made sense. Caleb gestured to the table. "All right, let's eat." Lianhua opened the basket she'd brought, and the smell that came out made Caleb's stomach clench. Real food. Not the thin soup and day-old bread he'd been stretching to feed Sarah. There was roasted chicken, still warm somehow. Fresh vegetables that hadn't come from a can. Bread that looked soft inside, not the hard stuff Chen sold for half price at the end of the day. She laid it out on his table without ceremony, her movements efficient but not rushed. Caleb watched her hands, pale and smooth, no calluses or scars. Hands that had never worked a day in their life, probably. Hands that had signed papers and counted money and done whatever it was wealthy people did with their time. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I wanted to. Sit, please." He sat. She sat across from him, and for a moment they just looked at the food between them like neither knew what to do next. "Your daughter," Lianhua said. "Sarah. How old is she?" 10. Be 11 in December. "You're raising her alone." "Yeah." He didn't want to talk about Rebecca, about how she died or what came after, so he just left it at that. Lianhua seemed to understand. She picked up a piece of chicken, put it on a plate, handed it to him. "She seems well cared for. I do what I can." "That's more than many do." They ate in silence for a while. The food was good, better than good, and Caleb had to force himself not to eat too fast. His body wanted to inhale everything on the table, store it up against the lean times he knew were coming. But he made himself take small bites, chew slowly, pretend this was normal. "You don't trust me," Lianhua said eventually. "Should I?" "Probably not." She set down her fork, dabbed at her mouth with a cloth napkin she'd brought. "I'm a stranger who made you an unusual offer. Trust would be foolish." "Then why make the offer?" "I told you. Loneliness." "Yeah, I heard that. But there's lonely, and then there's whatever this is. You want to explain the difference?" Lianhua was quiet, and Caleb could see her weighing something, deciding how much truth to give him. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, less careful, more raw. "I've been in this country for 3 years," she said. "In that time, I've attended exactly 47 dinners, business meetings disguised as social occasions, men in expensive suits talking about opportunities and partnerships and all the ways we might benefit each other financially." Sounds exhausting. It is. But what's worse is that in 47 dinners, not one person asked me a single question that didn't relate to my money. No one asked what I read, what I thought, what I wanted beyond the next acquisition or investment. She looked at him directly. "You're the first person who looked angry that I offered you wealth. Do you understand how rare that is?" Caleb pushed food around his plate. "I wasn't angry at the money. I was angry at the condition, because it felt like I was purchasing something beyond land." "Yeah. And what did you think I was trying to purchase?" He met her eyes. "I don't know. That's what bothered me." Something like a smile touched the corners of her mouth. Not quite amusement, something sadder. "Honesty. I was trying to purchase honesty. One evening where someone spoke to me like a person instead of a bank account. You could have just invited me to dinner, no money involved. Would you have come?" Caleb thought about it. If this wealthy Chinese woman had shown up and invited him to dinner with no offer attached, would he have said yes? Probably not. He would have assumed she was judging him, or pitying him, or wanted something he couldn't afford to give. "No," he admitted. "I wouldn't have." Exactly. The money was necessary to get your attention, to create a situation where you'd have to actually sit across from me and talk. That's pretty calculated. Yes, I'm good at calculations. It's how I survived. The way she said survived made Caleb look at her differently. This wasn't just wealth talking. This was someone who'd fought for something and won, but the victory had cost her. "What are you surviving?" he asked. "That's a longer conversation." She picked up her fork again. "Let's finish eating first." They ate, and somehow the silence wasn't as uncomfortable now. Caleb found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she held herself so straight, like someone had taught her posture was armor. The way she cut her food into precise pieces before eating it. Everything about her was controlled, measured, everything except her eyes, which looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. When the food was mostly gone, Lianhua started putting things back in the basket. Caleb helped without thinking about it, and their hands touched briefly over a dish. She pulled back fast, and he realized she wasn't used to being touched, even accidentally. "I should tell you something," Caleb said, "before we go any further with whatever this is." "All right. I accepted your offer because I'm desperate, because my daughter needs things I can't give her, because I'm 30 days from losing everything and I'm out of options." He looked at her steadily. "But I don't like it. I don't like that you had to buy your way into this conversation. I don't like that there's money hanging over it, making everything feel transactional. And I especially don't like that I'm angry about it, but doing it anyway because I don't have a choice." Lianhua absorbed this, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "What if you did have a choice?" "What? What if I removed the condition? What if I said you could have the land, the money, all of it, with no requirement for tonight?" Caleb stared at her. "That's not how business works." "This isn't business anymore." "Then what is it?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but I don't want it to be a transaction. I thought I did. I thought if I paid for your time, paid for this evening, it would feel less vulnerable, less like I was begging a stranger to see me as human." "You don't need to beg for that, don't I? You said yourself you wouldn't have come if I'd just invited you. The money was leverage, it was protection." She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the darkening land. "I've spent 3 years building walls out of wealth, making sure no one could hurt me because they'd have to get through all that money first. And it worked. I'm completely safe. I'm also completely alone." Caleb stood too, moved to stand a few feet away from her, close enough to talk quietly, far enough to give her space. "So what changed?" "I saw you. On the porch, looking at your land like it was breaking your heart to lose it. And I thought, there's someone who actually cares about something beyond its monetary value. Someone who might understand what it's like to lose things that matter." "You've lost things?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've lost everything that mattered. All I have left is money. And money, Mr. Thorne, is the loneliest thing in the world. They stood there, two people silhouetted against the window, and Caleb felt something shift. The anger that had been sitting in his chest all day started to ease. Not disappear. He was still broke, still desperate, still hated that he'd needed her offer. But underneath the anger, he could see what she was actually asking for: connection. The same thing he'd been starving for since Rebecca died. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to take back your condition." "What?" "The condition. The one night in exchange for the land. Take it back. You said I have a choice, so I'm choosing. No deal. The land stays mine, or doesn't, depending on what the bank decides. But either way, you don't get to buy this evening." Lianhua turned to look at him, confusion clear on her face. "I don't understand. You're here, aren't you? In my home, we've shared a meal. We're talking. That already happened, and you didn't have to pay for it. But the agreement is void. You're not a customer. You're a guest." He gestured to the room. "This isn't much, but it's mine, and you're welcome here. No transaction, no obligation, just company, if you want it." Something happened to her face then. The careful mask she'd been wearing cracked completely, and underneath it was raw surprise, like no one had ever offered her something without wanting something back. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You need the money. You said so yourself." "Yeah, I need it, but I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror more. And I can't do that if I'm selling evenings like they're cattle." He paused. "You want honesty? Here it is. I don't know you. I don't know if I even like you yet. But you came here looking for something human, something real, and I'll be damned if I'm going to make you pay for that. Nobody should have to pay for that." Lianhua stared at him, and Caleb watched emotions flicker across her face faster than he could name them. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been relief. Then, unexpectedly, tears. She turned away quickly, but not before he saw them. "I apologize. This is inappropriate." "It's fine." "It's not. I'm a guest in your home. I shouldn't—" Her voice broke. Caleb didn't know what to do. He was out of his depth here, way past anything his experience had prepared him for. But he thought about Sarah, about the times she cried and just needed someone to be there, not to fix it, just to be present. "Listen," he said carefully, "I'm going to make some coffee. The kind that's terrible, but at least it's hot. You can sit down, or stand there, or leave if you want. But if you're staying, you don't have to apologize for being human." He went to the stove, giving her space, filled the battered coffee pot with water, measured out grounds with hands that weren't quite steady. Behind him, he heard her take a shaky breath, then another, then the sound of her sitting down. They didn't talk while the coffee brewed. The silence was different now, not comfortable exactly, but not hostile either. Just two people existing in the same space, both trying to figure out what came next. When the coffee was ready, Caleb poured 2 cups and brought them to the table. The cups didn't match, one had a chip in the rim, but they were clean, and the coffee was hot, and sometimes that was enough. Lianhua wrapped her hands around her cup like she was cold, even though the evening was still warm. She'd composed herself mostly, but her eyes were red. "I haven't cried in front of another person in 4 years, she said. "That's a long time." "Yes, it is." She sipped the coffee, made a face. "This is terrible. I warned you." "You did." She took another sip anyway. "Why did you really do it? Void the agreement?" "I told you." "No, there's something else. I can see it." Caleb thought about lying or deflecting, but she'd been honest with him. Seemed only fair to return the favor. "My wife," he said. "Rebecca. When she was dying, she made me promise something. She said, don't let the world make you hard. Don't let it turn you into someone who does things just because he has to." He stared into his coffee. "I've broken a lot of promises to her. Promises about keeping the ranch going, about raising Sarah right, about not giving up. But that one, not becoming hard, I didn't want to break that one too." Lianhua was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "She sounds like she was remarkable." She was. She saw good in things I couldn't see, believed in people who didn't deserve it, drove me crazy sometimes, but she was right more often than not. "Do you think she'd approve of what you're doing now, helping me?" Caleb considered this. "Yeah, I think she would. She always said loneliness was the real poverty, that you could be broke and still be rich if you had people, and you could have all the money in the world and still be bankrupt if you were alone. That's a beautiful way to think about it. It's a hard way to live it. Turns out people are complicated. They leave or die or disappoint you. Money's simpler. Money's emptier. Yeah, that too. They drank their terrible coffee, and somehow it felt more genuine than the expensive meal they'd shared earlier. This was real. This was two people talking without scripts or expectations, just seeing what happened when they were honest with each other. Can I tell you something? Lianhua asked. Something I haven't told anyone? Sure. I'm afraid all the time, every day. Every business meeting, every decision, every moment I'm alone in that hotel room. She looked at him. People think wealth brings security. It doesn't. It just raises the stakes. The more you have, the more you're afraid of losing it. The more you're afraid of being used for it. Is that why you tested me? With the offer? Partially. I wanted to see if you'd take it immediately, without question. Most people do. They hear the number and everything else disappears. She paused. But you got angry instead. You questioned it. You made it clear you hated the terms even though you needed the money. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you might be someone I could actually talk to. That's a pretty low bar. You'd be surprised how many people don't clear it. Caleb refilled their cups, even though the coffee hadn't improved with time. Outside, full dark had settled in, and through the window he could see stars starting to appear. The kind of clear night Rebecca used to love, when she'd drag him outside just to look up at the sky. What do you do with all that land you've bought? He asked. Nothing yet. I'm acquiring it. For what purpose? Lianhua hesitated. I don't know. That's the truth. I started buying it because it was available, because I could, because doing something felt better than doing nothing. But I don't have a plan. I just keep accumulating. Sounds exhausting. It is. But it's also the only thing I know how to do. I was raised to acquire, to build, to expand. Stopping feels like failing. Or maybe it feels like arriving. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Just that maybe you bought all this land because you were looking for something. And maybe you haven't found it yet because you're too busy looking for the next thing to actually see what you already have. That's very philosophical for a rancher. My wife read a lot. Some of it rubbed off. He leaned back in his chair. But seriously, when's the last time you just sat somewhere and looked at it? Not as property or investment, but as a place. I don't understand. Come on. He stood up, and after a moment she followed. He led her out onto the porch, into the night air. It had cooled down some, enough to be comfortable. The stars were out in full now, thick across the sky in a way they never were in cities. Look, he said, gesturing out at the land. I'm looking. No, actually look. Not at what it's worth or what you could do with it. Just look at it. Lianhua stared out at the darkness, at the shapes of hills barely visible against the slightly lighter sky. At first her expression was puzzled, like he'd asked her to do something impossible. But then, slowly, something changed. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. Her breathing slowed. It's quiet, she said. Yeah. I'd forgotten what quiet sounds like, real quiet, not just absence of noise. They stood there, not talking, just listening to the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer, crickets made their steady rhythm. The wind moved through dried grass with a sound like whispering. My husband used to say land was just a commodity, Lianhua said quietly. Something to be bought, sold, used. He'd think I was foolish for standing here like this. Your husband sounds like he missed a lot. He did. He missed everything, actually. Built an empire and missed his entire life in the process. Do you miss him? She considered this. I miss the idea of having someone. But him specifically? No, he was never really there to miss. How'd you end up married to him? I was 17. My family was well connected but losing money. His family had money but wanted connections. It was arranged, very practical, very businesslike. Her voice was flat, reciting facts. I was a good investment. So was he, supposedly. That's a hell of a way to start a marriage. It's how things were done, are still done in some circles. You marry for advantage, not for love. Rebecca and I married because she laughed at my jokes, Caleb said. Even the bad ones. Especially the bad ones. Her father thought I was a terrible choice. No prospects, no future. He was probably right, but she married me anyway. You were lucky. I was. For a while. He looked at Lianhua standing there in her expensive silk and saw something he recognized. You came here looking for what I had with Rebecca, didn't you? That kind of connection. I came here not knowing what I was looking for, but yes, maybe something like that. You can't buy it. I know. That's what makes it so frustrating. She turned to face him. I can buy land, businesses, houses. I can buy services and goods and anyone's time. But I can't buy friendship. I can't buy the feeling of being understood. I can't buy someone seeing me as more than a source of wealth. No, you can't. But you can accept it when it's offered. Is it being offered? Caleb thought about that. This woman was still a stranger. Still someone from a completely different world than his. Still the person who'd shown up offering to buy her way into his life. But underneath all that, he could see someone struggling with the same thing he was. Someone who'd lost something important and didn't know how to find it again. Yeah, he said. I think it is. Lianhua's composure cracked again, just for a moment, and he saw something like hope flicker across her face. Then she put the mask back on, but looser this time. Less armor, more just habit. They went back inside, back to the table and the terrible coffee. Caleb found himself talking more than he had in months. About the ranch, about his father who'd built it, about watching it slowly fail despite his best efforts, about Sarah and her too small dress and her brave face when she delivered bad news, about Rebecca and how she'd made everything seem possible even when it wasn't. Lianhua listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or advice. Just listened. And when he was done, she started talking too. She told him about growing up in a house where she was valued for her potential usefulness, about a marriage that was a merger more than a relationship, about her husband who'd treated her like a particularly valuable asset, important to maintain but not to actually know, about the empire he'd built by being ruthless in ways she was still discovering. He died 3 years ago, she said. Heart attack. Very sudden, and I inherited everything because there were no other heirs. Suddenly, I had more money than I could comprehend, and absolutely no one who cared whether I lived or died beyond how it might affect stock prices. That's when you came here? To America? Yes. I thought distance might help. I thought starting over in a new place might feel like freedom. She laughed bitterly. But I brought all the money with me, and the money brought all the same problems. Different country, same isolation. Why not just give it away? The money? To who? Charities that would send me thank you letters and name buildings after me? People who'd suddenly be my best friend? I tried that. It just made it worse. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. So you bought land instead. I bought land instead. At least land doesn't pretend to care about me. They talked until this coffee was gone, and the night had deepened to that particular darkness that comes just before midnight. At some point, they'd moved from the table to the sitting area. Calling it a living room felt too generous. Caleb sat in his usual chair, the one with the worn armrest where he always put his elbow. Lianhua sat across from him, her posture still straight but less rigid now. You know what's strange, she said. I spent 3 years convinced I needed to find someone who hadn't heard of me or my money, someone who'd see me fresh. But tonight, with you, I realized that's not actually what I needed. No? No. What I needed was someone who'd seen the money, understood what it meant, and chose to see me anyway. That's much rarer. I don't know if I'm seeing you clearly, Caleb admitted. We've known each other for maybe 8 hours total. You're still mostly a stranger. But you're treating me like a person, not an opportunity. That's more than most people manage. The bar's pretty low if basic decency is impressive. The bar is exactly that low. Welcome to my world. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion underneath everything else. The weight of carrying all that money, all that suspicion, all that loneliness. It was its own kind of poverty, just like Rebecca had said. You asked me earlier what I thought you were trying to purchase, he said, and I said I didn't know, but I think I do now. What's that? Proof that you're still human. That underneath all the wealth and the business and the empire, there's still a person in there who can have a normal conversation with a broke rancher in a falling-apart house. Lianhua was very still. And did I find that proof? I don't know. Did you? She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes were wet again, but this time she didn't turn away. Yes, she whispered. I think I did. They sat in silence after that, but it was different from the uncomfortable silence at the start of the evening. This was the silence of people who'd said what needed to be said and were just existing together, no performance required. Eventually, Lianhua stood. I should go. It's late. You could stay, Caleb said, then immediately regretted it when he saw her expression. I mean, it's late and the hotel's a ways back. You could take the guest room, Sarah's room. It's not much, but it's clean. I don't want to impose. You're not. And honestly, after the conversation we just had, sending you back alone to that hotel feels wrong. She considered this. All right, thank you. He showed her to Sarah's room, which was small but had a decent bed and curtains Rebecca had sewn years ago. Lianhua stood in the doorway looking at it like it was something foreign. Is something wrong? He asked. No, it's just, I haven't slept in a room this simple in years. It's almost unsettling. Well, unsettling or not, it's yours for tonight. Washroom's down the hall. There's extra blankets in the chest if you get cold. Thank you, Caleb. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and something about hearing it in her accent made it sound new. Good night, Lianhua. He went to his own room, lay down in the too-big bed, and stared at the ceiling like he had the night before. But this time, his mind wasn't circling around impossible decisions. It was quieter, calmer. He'd done something right for once. He'd taken a situation that felt transactional and made it human. He'd seen someone struggling and offered what he could. Not money or solutions, but just presence, just witness. Rebecca would have approved, and somehow that mattered more than any amount of wealth Lianhua Wei could have offered him. Caleb woke to sunlight cutting through the gaps in his curtains and the smell of something cooking. For a disoriented moment, he thought Rebecca was in the kitchen, that the last 7 years had been some cruel dream and he'd wake up to find everything the way it used to be. Then reality settled back in, heavy and familiar, and he remembered. Lianhua, the stranger in his house. He got dressed and walked to the kitchen, where she stood at his stove turning eggs in a pan. She'd changed out of the black silk into something simpler, a plain gray dress she must have brought in that basket. Her hair was still pinned up, but looser now, a few strands escaping around her face. She looked younger like this, more real. I hope you don't mind, she said without turning around. I woke early and couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd make breakfast. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. It's been a long time since I cooked for anyone. You cook? I used to, before. She slid the eggs onto 2 plates, added some of the bread from last night, toasted somehow over the flame. My husband had servants for everything. I wasn't allowed in the kitchen. Said it wasn't appropriate for someone of my position. That's ridiculous. That was my life. She brought the plates to the table. Sit, eat. They ate in comfortable silence, and Caleb found himself studying her in the morning light. She looked tired, like maybe she hadn't slept much either. But there was something different about her face, less guarded, like the mask from yesterday had stayed off through the night. I've been thinking, she said after a while, about what you said, taking back the agreement. Yeah, I want to honor that. I'm not going to hold you to the land deal, but she paused. I would like to buy it anyway. Fair price, no conditions. You need the money. I want the land. It can be just business. Can it? I don't know, but I'd like to try. She met his eyes. You showed me something last night. Kindness without expectation. I want to give you something back. Not as payment, but as, I don't know what to call it. Gratitude, maybe. Caleb pushed eggs around his plate. The practical part of his brain was screaming at him to take the offer. The money would solve everything. But another part, the part that had listened to Rebecca's voice in his head last night, wasn't sure. Let me ask you something, he said. If you buy the land, what happens to me and Sarah? You could stay. I have no use for the house immediately. You could lease it back, or we could move, start somewhere new. Yes, that too. And we'd never see each other again. Lianhua set down her fork. Is that what you want? I'm asking what you want. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her plate like the answer might be written there. When she spoke, her voice was careful. I don't want to lose the only honest conversation I've had in 3 years. But I also don't want to trap you here with money. I don't want you to stay out of obligation. What if there was another option? What do you mean? Caleb stood up, walked to the window. The morning was clear, sun already heating up the land. Come with me. I want to show you something. They walked out to where he kept the horses. Lianhua looked at the old mare with uncertainty. I haven't ridden in years, she said. It's like anything else, you don't forget. He saddled up 2 horses, helped her mount. Her movements were stiff at first, but then muscle memory took over and she settled into the saddle with surprising grace. They rode east toward the ridge that overlooked the valley. It took about 20 minutes, and by the time they got there, the sun was fully up, turning everything gold. Caleb dismounted and helped Lianhua down, then led her to the edge where you could see for miles. This is what you're buying, he said, gesturing out at the land. Not just my 500 acres, but all of it. Everything you can see. Lianhua looked, and he watched her face as she took it in. The valley stretched out below them, hills rolling away into distance. You could see the remains of old homesteads, stone foundations where houses used to be, fence lines running between properties that hadn't been worked in years. And beyond that, the land she'd already purchased, vast and empty. It's bigger than I thought, she said quietly. Most things are when you actually look at them. He pointed to a cluster of buildings far to the north. That's the old Morrison place. Biggest ranch in the valley back in the day. Morrison ran cattle, had 50 men working for him. Built a whole town around his operation. School, church, general store, everything. What happened to it? Same thing that happened to everyone. Land gave out. Drought came. Markets crashed. Morrison held on longer than most, but eventually he had to sell. That was about 10 years ago. Who bought it? Different people, different pieces, all strangers, investors mostly, people who saw opportunity in buying cheap land during hard times. He looked at her. People like you. Lianhua flinched. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just stating facts. This whole valley is full of land that used to belong to families. Real people who built lives here. And now it belongs to people who never even saw it before they signed the papers. Is that what you think I am? Someone who buys and never sees? No. I think you're someone who bought without understanding what you were buying, but now you're here. Now you're seeing it. He gestured to the valley again. So I'm asking, what are you going to do with it? I told you I don't know. I don't have a plan. Then make one. You've got more land than one person could use in a lifetime. You've got resources most people can't even imagine. You could do something that matters here, or you could let it all just sit empty while you collect it like stamps. What would you have me do? Caleb turned to face her fully. I'd have you think about what Rebecca said, about loneliness being the real poverty. Look at this valley. Look at all this empty land. It used to be full of people, families, communities. Now it's just vacant. You asked me last night what you were looking for, and I said, maybe you were looking for a place. Well, this could be that place, but only if you actually do something with it. Like what? I don't know. That's your decision. But you could bring people back. You could make this valley alive again instead of just owned. Lianhua stared out at the land, and Caleb could see her mind working. Calculating, probably. Weighing options and risks and returns. That's what people like her did. They turned everything into numbers. There's no profit in that, she said finally. Bringing people back, rebuilding communities. It's not a sound investment. No, it's not. Then why would I do it? Because maybe there are things more valuable than profit. Maybe there's value in not being alone anymore. She turned to look at him, and something in her expression had shifted. You're asking me to fundamentally change how I think about wealth. I'm asking you to think about what you actually want. Not what you should want or what makes sense financially, what you actually want. I don't know how to answer that. Then maybe that's the problem. They stood there in silence, wind moving through the grass at their feet, and Caleb wondered if he'd pushed too hard. This woman didn't owe him anything. She'd offered him a way out, and he'd turned it into a philosophy lecture about the meaning of wealth. But something about standing here, looking at all this empty land, made him angry in a way he hadn't felt before. This was wrong. All of it. Land sitting empty while people struggled, money being hoarded while communities died. One person owning more than they could ever use while others lost everything. My father used to say land was trust, Caleb said quietly, that if you owned it, you had a responsibility to it. Not just to extract value, but to care for it, to make it better for the next person. That's a beautiful idea. It's a hard idea. He died trying to live up to it. Worked himself into the ground trying to keep this place going. And for what? So I could watch it fail anyway. You haven't failed, haven't I? Look at me. 32 years old, broke, about to lose everything my family built. If that's not failure, I don't know what is. Failure is giving up. You're still fighting. Fighting with what? I'm out of options, out of money, out of time. He laughed bitterly. The only reason I'm still here is because you showed up with a bag of gold, and I'm too stubborn to take it the way you offered it. Then take it differently. What? Lianhua moved closer to him, and there was intensity in her eyes now. You said I should make a plan. Help me make one. Show me what this valley could be if someone actually cared about it instead of just owning it. I don't understand. You need money. I need purpose. You know this land, these people. I have resources you can't imagine. What if we work together? What if instead of me buying you out and you leaving, we figured out how to make something that actually matters? Caleb stared at her. You're serious? I don't know. Maybe. I'm thinking out loud. She was pacing now, energy building. You talked about bringing people back, rebuilding communities. What would that actually look like? How would it work? It's not that simple. Nothing worthwhile is simple. Tell me. He thought about it, really thought about it. You'd need infrastructure, housing that doesn't fall apart, access to water, roads that don't wash out every spring. You'd need to make it possible for people to actually live here and make a living. What else? You'd need to give them a reason to come, jobs probably, or at least the opportunity to build something. Most people who left didn't want to. They just couldn't survive here anymore. So bring them back. Offer them land they can actually afford, resources to rebuild. With what money? With mine. You'd lose everything. This isn't an investment, it's charity, and charity doesn't scale. You'd burn through your wealth in a year trying to rebuild an entire valley. Maybe that's exactly what I should do. Caleb stopped, turned to face her fully. You can't be serious. Why not? What else am I going to do with it? Let it sit in banks while I buy more land I don't need? Die alone in some mansion I bought to prove I could afford it? She was breathing hard now, color in her cheeks. You're right. About all of it. I've been collecting wealth like it means something, but it doesn't. It's just numbers, paper, promises. The only thing that actually matters is what you do with it. Lianhua? No. Listen, for 3 years I've been walking around with this weight, this burden of money I didn't earn and don't know what to do with. And I've been telling myself it's a blessing, it's security, it's power. But it's not any of those things. It's a cage. It keeps everyone at a distance. It makes every interaction transactional. It's the loneliest thing in the world, and I'm tired of being lonely. She was almost crying again, and Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't the controlled, careful woman from yesterday. This was someone breaking, finally saying the truth she'd been carrying. So what are you saying? He asked quietly. I'm saying maybe I don't want to buy your land. Maybe I want to do something bigger. Maybe I want to actually use this wealth for something that matters instead of just accumulating more of it. That's a hell of a decision to make standing on a ridge at dawn. When else am I going to make it? I've been waiting for the right moment, the right plan, the right everything. Maybe there is no right moment. Maybe you just have to decide and then figure it out as you go. Caleb looked at her, this wealthy widow who'd shown up in a black carriage offering to buy one night, and realized she'd been just as desperate as him, just in a different way. All right, he said, let's say you're serious. Let's say you actually want to do this. Where do you even start? I don't know. That's why I need your help. I'm a failing rancher. I don't know anything about running some kind of charitable empire. But you know this land. You know these people. You know what they need. What they need is money and opportunity. I can't provide either of those. But I can. Together, maybe we could actually do something. They stood there, and Caleb felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was insane. Partnering with a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours on some half-formed plan to rebuild a dying valley. It would probably fail. It would definitely be complicated. And it would mean staying here, staying visible, dealing with all the gossip and judgment he'd been dreading. But it would also mean something. It would mean trying. There's something I need to know first, he said, before we go any further with this crazy idea. What? Where did your money come from? How did your husband build his empire? Lianhua's face went carefully blank. Does it matter? Yeah, it does, because if we're going to do this together, I need to know who I'm partnering with. I'm not my husband. That's not an answer. She turned away, looking out at the valley instead of at him. When she spoke, her voice was tight. He was in shipping. Import-export. He built trade networks across 3 continents. That's still not an answer. What do you want me to say? The truth, however ugly it is. Lianhua was silent for a long time, and Caleb waited. He'd learned patience in 7 years of watching things fail slowly. He could wait for this too. He wasn't a good man, she said finally. He built his wealth by being ruthless, by taking advantage of situations other people couldn't navigate, by buying low from people who were desperate and selling high to people who had no choice. Go on. He destroyed competitors, ruined people who got in his way, used information and leverage and sometimes worse things to get what he wanted. Her voice was shaking now. I didn't know the full extent of it while he was alive. He kept me separate from the business, but after he died, I found documents, records, evidence of things I can't unknow. What kind of things? The kind that keep me awake at night. The kind that make me wonder if all this wealth is actually blood money. Caleb absorbed this. He'd suspected something like this. Nobody built that kind of fortune by being kind, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a gut punch. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked for truth, and because if we're going to work together, you deserve to know what you're partnering with. I'd be partnering with you, not your dead husband, but I benefited from what he did. I'm still benefiting. Every acre I bought, every dollar I spend, it all came from him, from his ruthlessness. So what are you going to do about it? She turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. What? You can't change where the money came from, but you can change what you do with it now, so what are you going to do? I thought you'd be angry, disgusted. I am, a little. But mostly, I'm just sad. For you, for all the people your husband hurt, for the whole damn system that rewards people for being ruthless. He moved closer to her. But being sad doesn't change anything. Action changes things. So I'm asking again, what are you going to do about it? Lianhua stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. I could try to make amends, use the money to help people instead of hurt them. That's a start. But how do I even begin to make up for what he did? How do I balance those scales? You probably can't, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You're being very generous. I'm being practical. You've got resources and guilt. I've got needs and knowledge. We can either stand here debating the morality of your inheritance, or we can figure out how to use it for something good. It's not that simple, not. Nothing ever is. He gestured back toward the horses. Come on, there's something else I want to show you. They rode back down from the ridge, but instead of heading to the ranch, Caleb took them further east toward the old Morrison property. As they got closer, Lianhua could see the bones of what used to be, building foundations, collapsed barns, a rusted water tower leaning at a dangerous angle. This was the center of everything, Caleb said as they dismounted. 300 people lived within 5 miles of here. They had a school that went through 8th grade, a church that held weddings and funerals, a general store where people gathered to share news. What happened to them all? They left. Slowly at first, then all at once. The work dried up and people had to follow opportunity elsewhere. Some went to cities, some went to other states, some just disappeared. Nobody knows where. Lianhua walked through the ruins, and Caleb watched her take it in. She stopped at what used to be the school, where you could still see part of a chalkboard leaning against a wall. Children learned here, she said quietly. Yeah, Sarah's grandmother actually taught here for a while before she married my father. It's so sad. All this history, just left to decay. That's what happens when people can't survive in a place anymore. They take what they can carry and leave the rest. Lianhua turned to face him, and there were tears on her face now, not bothering to hide them. My husband did this. Maybe not here specifically, but places like this. He bought land when people were desperate, paid them pennies, then either sat on it or sold it to other investors for profit. He never cared about the communities he was destroying. Probably not. And now I own it. I own the ruins of people's lives. Yeah, you do? Caleb moved to stand beside her. So what are you going to do with it? I don't know how to fix this. Maybe you can't fix it, but you can try to build something new. How? Before Caleb could answer, something in his peripheral vision caught his attention. A piece of paper tacked to what remained of the general store's wall. He walked over to it, Lianhua following. It was old, faded by sun and rain, but still partly readable. A notice of some kind. Caleb pulled it down carefully, and as he read it, his blood went cold. What is it? Lianhua asked. He didn't answer, just kept reading. It was a land purchase agreement, dated 15 years ago, describing the sale of the Thorne family's original homestead, not the ranch he lived on now, but the land his grandfather had settled. The land that had been in his family for 3 generations before his father lost it. And the name on the purchase agreement, the name of the company that had bought it for a fraction of its value during the worst drought in 50 years, was one he recognized. Wei Trading Company. Her husband's company. Caleb looked at Lianhua, and she must have seen something in his face because hers went pale. What? She asked, but her voice was shaking like she already knew. He handed her the paper without speaking. She read it, and he watched the blood drain from her face completely. Her hand started shaking so badly she almost dropped the document. No, she whispered. No, that's not. It can't be. It is. Your husband bought my family's land. The original Thorne homestead. 300 acres that my grandfather cleared by hand. That my father grew up on. That should have been mine. Caleb, I didn't know. I know you didn't, but he did. And now you own it. You own the land that was stolen from my family. Lianhua stumbled backward like he'd hit her. Stolen? What else would you call it? My father was desperate. The drought had killed half our herd. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Your husband offered him money, but it was a fraction of what the land was worth. My father tried to negotiate, tried to get fair value, but your husband said take it or leave it. So my father took it, because he had no choice. I'm so sorry. And you know what happened after? Your husband held on to that land for exactly 2 years, then sold it to a railroad company for 10 times what he paid. 10 times. While my family scraped by on the little ranch we had left. I didn't know. Lianhua was crying openly now. I swear to you, I didn't know. But you benefited from it. Every dollar you've spent came partly from that deal, from my family's desperation. Yes. Her voice was barely audible. Yes, I did. Caleb wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at her husband, at the whole rotten system that let people like Wei build empires on other people's suffering. But looking at her face, seeing the genuine horror and shame there, he found he couldn't sustain the anger. She hadn't done this. She just inherited the consequences. Where's it now? He asked. That land. What happened to it after the railroad company bought it? I don't know. I'd have to check the records. Check them. She looked at him, confused. Why? Because I want to know. I want to know what happened to the land my grandfather cleared, the land my father lost, the land that should have been my daughter's inheritance. What difference does it make? It's gone. I can't change what my husband did. No, but maybe you can make it right. How? How do I possibly make this right? Caleb looked at the ruins around them, at this dead town built on broken dreams, and made a decision that was probably insane, but felt more right than anything he'd done in years. Find out who owns that land now, and then we buy it back. However much it costs, whatever we have to do, we get it back. And then what? And then we build something there, something that actually matters. We bring people back. We create the community my grandfather imagined when he first cleared that ground. That's impossible. Probably. But we're going to try anyway. Lianhua stared at him like he'd lost his mind, and maybe he had. But standing here in the ruins of Morrison's dream, holding proof that her husband had destroyed his family's legacy, Caleb felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice, really. It was about taking something that had been used for harm and transforming it into something good. It was about looking at all this empty land, all this wasted potential, and saying no more. Why would you want to work with me now? Lianhua asked, her voice broken. After what you just learned? Because you're not him, and because staying angry at you for what he did doesn't help anyone. But using your resources to fix what he broke, that might actually mean something. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not forgiving you. I'm choosing to move forward. There's a difference. She looked at him with tears still streaming down her face, and Caleb saw the moment she understood. This wasn't about her earning redemption. It was about both of them choosing to build instead of destroying, to connect instead of isolating. It was about refusing to let the past dictate the future. All right, she said quietly. Tell me what to do. First, we need to find out who owns that land now. Then we need to figure out how much it'll cost to buy it back. Then, he paused. Then we need to make a plan. A real one. Not just vague ideas about rebuilding communities, but actual steps. Real actions. I can do that. I'm good at plans. I know you are. That's why I'm asking. They walked back to the horses in silence, both processing what had just happened. Caleb's mind was racing, trying to absorb the magnitude of what he'd just learned and what he'd just committed to. This woman's husband had destroyed his family's legacy, and now he was partnering with her to try to rebuild it. Rebecca would have either called him crazy or brilliant, maybe both. As they mounted up, Lianhua spoke quietly. Thank you. For what? For not hating me. For seeing me as separate from him. For giving me a chance to do something good with all this blood money. Don't thank me yet. We haven't actually done anything except talk. And talk is easy. Action is hard. I know. But at least now I have a direction. At least now I know what I'm trying to do. They rode back toward the ranch, and Caleb felt the morning sun on his back, warming him. Ahead, he could see his small house, his failing ranch, all the evidence of his struggles. But he could also see in his mind what it might become. Not immediately, not easily, but possible. For the first time in 7 years, he felt something that might have been hope. When they got back to the ranch, Tom Birch was waiting on the porch with Sarah. The old man took one look at Caleb's face and stood up slowly, reading something there that made his expression tighten. Everything all right, boss? No, but it will be. Caleb dismounted, helped Lianhua down. Sarah, sweetheart, why don't you go inside and start on your lessons? But I want to. Inside, please. Sarah looked between him and Lianhua and Tom, clearly sensing something important was happening, but she went. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Tom crossed his arms. What happened out there? Found out some things about where Mrs. Wei's money came from. And her husband's company bought the original Thorne homestead 15 years ago, for pennies, then sold it for a fortune. Tom went very still. You're sure? Found the paperwork posted at Morrison's place. Date, price, everything. Tom looked at Lianhua, and his face hardened in a way Caleb had rarely seen. The old man was gentle most of the time, slow to anger, but there was steel underneath. That land was sacred to Caleb's father. Losing it broke something in him. I know, Lianhua said quietly. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring it back. No, it doesn't, but I'm going to try to make it right. Tom laughed, bitter and sharp. How? You gonna magic the last 15 years away? Gonna unbreak what your husband broke? Tom, Caleb said. That's enough. The hell it is. You know what happened after we lost that land? Your father worked himself into an early grave trying to make this smaller ranch support the family. Your mother died of grief. And this woman shows up with money built on their suffering, and you're gonna what? Partner with her? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Tom stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You've lost your mind. Maybe, but I'm doing it anyway. Why? Caleb looked at Lianhua, who stood very still, taking Tom's anger without defending herself. Because she's not her husband. Because the money exists whether we like it or not. And because using it to rebuild what he destroyed is better than just being angry about it. That's easy to say when you're not the one who watched your father kill himself working. I was there, Tom. I watched it too. And I'm tired of it. Tired of the anger, tired of the bitterness, tired of watching this whole valley die because of what men like her husband did. Caleb's voice rose. We can stay angry, or we can do something. Those are the only two options. Tom was quiet for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. Finally, he spat in the dust and shook his head. You're making a mistake. Probably. Won't be my first. Don't come crying to me when she screws you over. I won't. Tom walked away toward the barn, shoulders tight with anger. Caleb watched him go, feeling the weight of it. Tom had been there through everything. He'd earned the right to his anger. I should go, Lianhua said. I'm causing problems. You're causing truth. That's different. Caleb turned to face her. Tom's right about one thing, though. My father did kill himself working after we lost that land. Took him 8 years, but that loss ate him alive. Then why are you doing this? Why work with me? Because my father also taught me that you can't move forward while looking backward, and because Sarah deserves better than inheriting my bitterness. Lianhua nodded slowly. What do we do now? Now you go back to town, find out who owns that land, and figure out what it'll take to get it back. I'll stay here and try to salvage what's left of my reputation after the whole town figures out you spent the night. I could tell people the truth. Won't matter. They'll believe what they want to believe. He smiled tiredly. Small towns are like that. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just said, I'll send word when I have information. All right. Her driver had been waiting near the barn, and he brought the carriage around. Lianhua climbed in, then paused. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on this. On me. Don't thank me yet. We haven't actually accomplished anything. We've started. That's more than I've done in 3 years. The carriage pulled away and Caleb stood watching until it disappeared in dust and distance. Then he went inside to face Sarah, who was absolutely not doing her lessons and definitely waiting to interrogate him. She sat at the table with a book open but unread, and the moment he walked in, she pounced. What happened? Why is Mr. Tom so angry? It's complicated, sweetheart. I'm not a baby. Tell me. Caleb sat down across from her, trying to figure out how to explain this to a 10-year-old. Mrs. Wei's husband did some bad things, hurt some people, including our family. What did he do? He took land that belonged to us, your great-grandfather's land. He bought it when we were desperate and couldn't say no, then made a lot of money from it. Sarah absorbed this, her face serious. So Mrs. Wei is bad too? No, she didn't do it. Her husband did, and he's dead now. She just inherited the money. But she's using that money. Yeah, she is, but she wants to use it to fix what her husband broke, to help people instead of hurt them. Do you believe her? It was such a simple question, but Caleb found himself really thinking about it. Did he believe her? This woman who'd shown up offering to buy one night, who'd revealed her loneliness and her guilt, who'd stood in the ruins of Morrison's place and cried at what her husband had done? Yeah, he said. I think I do. Okay. Sarah went back to her book, apparently satisfied. That's it, okay? You're not stupid, Papa. If you think she's good, she's probably good. Caleb felt something crack in his chest. Such simple faith, such trust. He didn't deserve it, but there it was anyway. I love you, sweetheart. I know, love you too. The next 3 days were strange. Caleb worked the ranch, tried to keep things running, waited for word from Lianhua. Tom stayed angry, speaking only when necessary, making his disapproval clear in every silent gesture. And the town started talking, exactly like Caleb had known they would. He went into redemption for supplies on the 3rd day, and the whispers started before he even tied up his horse. Porter at the hotel gave him a knowing look. Mrs. Chen at the general store asked pointed questions about his business arrangements with certain wealthy widows. By the time he left, he could feel eyes on him from every doorway. At the feed store, things got worse. Marcus Webb, who owned the bank and half the businesses in town, was there talking to the owner. He looked up when Caleb walked in, and something like satisfaction crossed his face. Thorne, heard you had interesting company the other night. News travels fast. In a town this size, always does. Webb moved closer, and Caleb caught the smell of expensive cologne and cheaper whiskey. That Chinese widow, the one buying up land. Heard she spent the night at your place. She was a guest. I'm sure she was. Webb smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Must be nice having friends with that kind of money, especially when you're 30 days from foreclosure. I'll make my payment. With what? You've got nothing left to sell. No herd worth mentioning, no equipment, no prospects. Webb leaned in. Or maybe you found a new revenue stream. Hospitality services for lonely widows? Caleb's fist connected with Webb's face before he'd consciously decided to swing. The banker went down hard, blood streaming from his nose, and the feed store went silent. You son of a... Webb struggled to his feet, but the store owner stepped between them. That's enough. Both of you. Caleb's hand throbbed. He'd split a knuckle on Webb's teeth, and it was already swelling. Worth it, though. Absolutely worth it. You'll regret that, Webb spat, holding his nose. I'll call your loan tomorrow. Foreclose immediately. You'll lose everything. Then I lose everything, but at least I'll do it with my dignity intact. Caleb walked out before he could hit Webb again. His hand hurt, his reputation was shredded, and he'd probably just sealed his fate with the bank. But he felt clearer than he had in days. Some things you didn't tolerate. Some insults you didn't let stand. He was halfway back to the ranch when he saw the black carriage coming toward him. It stopped, and Lianhua stepped out, taking one look at his face and his bleeding hand. What happened? Had a discussion with the bank manager about appropriate behavior. Your hand is bleeding. His nose is broken. I call it even. Caleb started to move past her, but she caught his arm. Did you do this because of me? Because of what people are saying? I did it because he needed hitting. Caleb, don't. I'm not in the mood for lectures about keeping my temper or protecting my interests. I hit him because he said something he shouldn't have, and I'd do it again. Lianhua was quiet for a moment, then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a big smile, just a small quirk at the corner of her mouth, but it was real. Good, she said. I'm glad you hit him. You are? Yes, I've wanted to hit people approximately 47 times in the last 3 years. It's gratifying to know someone actually did it. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. You're strange. You know that? I've been told. She gestured to the carriage. Get in. I have news, and I'd rather not share it on the side of the road. They rode to the ranch in silence, Lianhua occasionally glancing at his swelling hand. When they arrived, she went to her basket. She'd apparently taken to carrying supplies with her and pulled out bandages and salve. I don't need... Sit down and let me wrap it, unless you want it to get infected. He sat. She worked quietly, her hands gentle but efficient. Up close like this, Caleb could see the fine lines around her eyes, the exhaustion that never quite left her face. You found something, he said. Yes. The land, your family's original homestead. It was sold to the railroad company, like you said, but the railroad went bankrupt 6 years ago. The land went to their creditors, who sold it to a development company out of Chicago. And that company hasn't done anything with it. It's been sitting empty, no improvements, no use. They bought it speculating that the railroad would come through eventually, but it never did. So they'll sell. For the right price, yes. She tied off the bandage. I contacted them through intermediaries. They're asking $20,000. Caleb whistled low. That's robbery. It's business. They know I want it, so they're inflating the price. Can you afford it? Yes, but that's not the question. She sat back, looking at him steadily. The question is what we do with it once we have it. We build. Build what exactly? We need specifics, plans, something more than vague ideals. Caleb thought about the empty valley, the dead towns, all those people who'd left because they had no choice. We build a place where people can come back, where they can afford land, afford to start over. We create what Morrison had before it all fell apart. That's still vague. All right, specifics. He stood up, started pacing despite his throbbing hand. We buy the land. We divide it into parcels, 20, maybe 30 acres each. We sell them to families who want to farm or ranch, but we sell them cheap, below market. We take losses on the land itself. That's not sustainable. I'm not done. We also provide loans for building, low interest, long term. We help people get established, and we build infrastructure, a school, a store, a church, if people want it. We create the foundation that lets a community exist. That will cost a fortune. You have a fortune. Not unlimited. If I spend it all on this one project, then you spend it. You said you wanted to do something that mattered. This matters. Lianhua stood, moved to the window. She was quiet for a long time, and Caleb let her think. This was a massive decision, and she needed to come to it herself. If I do this, she said finally, if I commit to this plan, I'll lose most of what I have. I'll go from wealthy to middle class, maybe. comfortable but not rich. Is that so bad? It means losing security, losing power, losing the ability to protect myself. Or it means gaining something more valuable, community, purpose, people who actually care whether you live or die. You can't guarantee that. No, I can't. But I can tell you that money hasn't protected you so far. It's just isolated you. She turned to face him. You're asking me to give up everything. I'm asking you to trade one thing for another. Wealth for meaning, isolation for connection. And if it fails, if we do all this and people don't come, or they come and it doesn't work, or 100 other things go wrong, then we fail. But at least we'll fail trying to build something instead of succeeding at nothing. Lianhua stared at him, and Caleb could see the war happening behind her eyes. Fear versus hope. Security versus possibility. The known loneliness versus the unknown risk of connection. My husband used to say sentiment was weakness, she said quietly. That the only thing that mattered was profit and power. He'd think I was insane for even considering this. Your husband was wrong about a lot of things. Yes, he was. She took a deep breath. All right, let's do it. Buy the land, make the plans, build the community. All of it. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, like a weight he'd been carrying for years suddenly lifted. This was insane. It was risky. It would probably end badly, but it was also the first thing that had felt right since Rebecca died. We'll need help, he said. We can't do this alone. I know. I'll hire people. No, not hired people. Partners. People who have a stake in making this work. Like who? Tom, for one. He's angry now, but he knows this land better than anyone. And he's got contacts, people who left, people who might come back if the opportunity was real. He hates me. He hates what your husband did. That's different. And if we're actually going to rebuild his community, I think he'll come around. What about the town? Redemption? They're not going to support this after what happened today. Probably not. But we're not doing it for them. We're doing it for the people who left. The ones who got pushed out by men like Webb and your husband. The ones who deserve a second chance. Lianhua nodded slowly. When do we start? Now, today. We buy that land before the Chicago company changes their mind. We draw up plans. We make this real. I'll need to go back to town, arrange the funds. Wait, Caleb caught her arm. Before you do this, before you commit everything, I need you to be sure, really sure. This isn't just business. This is your life. Once you start down this road, there's no going back to who you were. Who I was? You mean wealthy and alone? Yeah. Then I don't want to go back. She looked at him directly. I've been that person for 3 years, Caleb. I've had every comfort money can buy and felt empty the whole time. If this fails, if we lose everything trying, at least I'll have tried to be something more than a bank account with a heartbeat. All right then, let's get started. Over the next week, Caleb's small house became a planning center. Lianhua brought maps and documents and ledgers. They spread everything out on the kitchen table and the floor and anywhere else that had space. They worked late into the night, arguing over details, revising plans, trying to account for all the ways things could go wrong. Tom stayed angry for 3 days, then showed up one morning with his own maps and his own ideas. He didn't apologize for his earlier words, and Lianhua didn't ask him to. They just started working, 3 people trying to figure out how to resurrect a dead valley. Sarah watched it all with quiet interest, occasionally asking questions that cut right to the heart of problems they'd been dancing around. More than once, her simple logic solved issues they'd been stuck on for hours. The town continued to gossip, and Webb made good on his threat. He called Caleb's loan, started foreclosure proceedings. Caleb should have been terrified, but instead he felt oddly calm. The worst was happening, and somehow it wasn't as bad as he'd thought it would be. Lianhua offered to pay off the loan, but Caleb refused. Why? She asked, frustrated. You'll lose the ranch. Maybe. But I need to lose it honestly. If you pay it off, people will say I sold myself to you. If I lose it to the bank, that's just business. That's the stupidest pride I've ever encountered. Probably, but it's my stupid pride and I'm keeping it. She threw up her hands but didn't push further. And somehow that restraint meant more than the money would have. 2 weeks in, they had a plan. Not a perfect plan, but a real one. Purchase the original Thorne homestead for $20,000. Divide it into 25 parcels of 12 acres each. Sell them for cost of development only, basically giving the land away, but recouping enough to build infrastructure. Provide low-interest loans for construction, equipment, initial stock. Build a school, a general store, a community center. Create the foundation for a town. Total cost, approximately 80% of Lianhua's liquid wealth. That's everything, Tom said, looking at the final numbers. If this fails, you'll be broke. I know, Lianhua said calmly. And you're okay with that? I'm terrified. But yes, I'm okay with it. Tom looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right then. Let's send the letters. The letters went out to everyone they could think of. People who'd left the valley, people who'd been forced to sell, people who'd written off this place as dead. The letters explained the plan, the opportunity, the vision. They didn't promise success. They didn't guarantee anything. They just offered a chance. And then they waited. The first response came a week later. A family named Morrison, distant relatives of the original Morrison, who'd been working a failing farm in Kansas. They'd heard about the plan and wanted to know more. Was it real? Could they actually afford it? Lianhua wrote back immediately. Yes, it was real. Yes, they could afford it. Come see. The Morrisons arrived 3 days later, dusty and suspicious and desperately hopeful. Caleb and Lianhua showed them the land, explained the terms, answered every skeptical question. The Morrisons walked the property for hours, the father checking soil, the mother looking at where a house might go. At sunset, they came back to where Caleb and Lianhua waited. We'll take it, the father said simply. And just like that, it started. More letters came, more families. Some came to look and left unconvinced, but others stayed. Others saw what Caleb and Lianhua saw, possibility, a second chance, a place to build something that mattered. By the end of the month, 8 families had committed, 8 parcels claimed, $15,000 spent on land purchase and initial infrastructure. Caleb should have been celebrating, but instead he was sitting on his porch at dawn, staring at the foreclosure notice Webb had delivered the day before. In 2 weeks, the bank would seize his ranch. Everything his father had worked for would be gone. The door opened behind him. Lianhua sat down beside him, 2 cups of terrible coffee in her hands. I could still pay it off, she said. I know, and I'm still saying no. Why? What's the point of losing it now when we're so close to something good? Because if I let you save me, I'll always wonder if you did it out of pity or obligation. This way I know. Everything we're building together, we're building as equals, not as savior and saved. That's ridiculous. We're not equals. I have money, you have knowledge. We each bring different things. Exactly. Different things, not better or worse, just different. He sipped his coffee. Besides, Sarah and I don't need much. We'll find somewhere to go. You could stay at the new settlement once houses start going up. Maybe, if there's room. There'll always be room for you. This is your family's land we're rebuilding. You belong there more than anyone. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd shown up weeks ago offering to buy one night and had instead bought into a completely different dream. When did you get so idealistic? When I met someone who showed me money wasn't the only thing worth having. They sat in silence, drinking bad coffee and watching the sun come up, and Caleb felt something he'd thought was dead. Not happiness exactly, but something close, something like purpose. 2 weeks later, the bank took his ranch. Caleb and Sarah packed what they could carry, said goodbye to the house Rebecca had loved, and moved into temporary quarters Tom had set up in the barn at the new settlement site. It should have felt like defeat, should have felt like the end of everything. Instead, it felt like the start. The barn smelled like hay and horses and sawdust, and at night Sarah complained about the mice scurrying in the walls. Caleb told her it built character. She told him that was adult speak for, this is terrible, but we're stuck with it. She wasn't wrong. But every morning when he woke up and walked outside, he saw something that made the discomfort worth it. The land that had been empty for 15 years was coming alive again. The Morrisons had already started framing their house, the father and his 2 sons working from dawn until they couldn't see anymore. The Carters, a young couple from Missouri, had cleared their plot and were digging a well. The Yamazaki family, Japanese immigrants who'd been sharecropping in California were surveying their section, planning irrigation channels that made Caleb realize he'd been thinking too small. Lianhua was everywhere and nowhere. She'd hired a foreman, a gruff German man named Klaus who knew construction and didn't care who was paying him as long as the work was good. But she still showed up most days, dressed in simpler clothes now, her hair less elaborate, her hands getting dirty alongside everyone else. The town of Redemption watched from a distance with mixed reactions. Some people, like Webb, sneered and predicted failure. Others, the ones who'd lost their own land or watched family members leave, looked at what was happening with something that might have been hope. 3 months in, they had 12 families committed and 6 houses partially built. The general store was just a foundation, but it was there. The school was still a plan on paper, but Tom had found a teacher, a widow from Denver, who wanted a fresh start and didn't mind teaching in a tent until they had walls. It wasn't easy. Nothing about it was easy. The Harpers and the Schultz family got into a boundary dispute that almost came to blows until Caleb and Klaus mediated. The first well the Carters dug came up dry, and they lost 2 weeks and $50 finding water. A late spring storm destroyed the Morrisons' framing, and they had to start over. Lianhua's money was draining faster than they'd projected, and twice she had to liquidate assets back east to keep things moving. But they kept going. Sarah started helping the teacher, Miss Brennan, prepare lessons, even though there were no students yet. Tom worked himself half to death surveying new plots and arguing with Klaus about proper drainage. And Caleb found himself in the strange position of being the unofficial mayor of a town that didn't exist yet. People came to him with problems, disputes over water rights, questions about land boundaries, concerns about supplies and timing, and 100 other things he had no experience with. He did his best, made decisions, got some wrong, fixed what he could. It was exhausting and exhilarating and absolutely nothing like running a failing ranch alone. One evening, 4 months into the project, Lianhua showed up at the barn looking worse than Caleb had ever seen her. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, her dress was dusty, and she had shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "We need to talk," she said. Caleb sent Sarah to help Miss Brennan and led Lianhua to the small table he'd set up in the corner of the barn. She sat down heavily, like her bones hurt. "What's wrong?" "Money. It's going faster than I projected. At this rate, I'll be completely broke in 6 months, maybe less." "How broke?" Broke. Nothing left. No safety net, no reserve, nothing. Caleb absorbed this. "Can you slow down, stretch what you have?" "Not without stopping construction. And if we stop now, half these families will give up. They're here because they believe we'll finish what we started. If we quit halfway, we don't quit. Then I go broke." "Then you go broke." He leaned forward. "Is that really the worst thing? You'll still have land. You can claim one of the plots, build a house, start over like everyone else." "I'll be poor." "You'll be equal. There's a difference." Lianhua laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "I'm terrified. I've been wealthy for so long I don't remember what it's like to worry about money, and now I'm about to find out. Welcome to how the rest of us live." "That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. It's just true." Caleb reached across the table, almost took her hand, then pulled back. They'd been careful about that, about keeping things professional, about not giving the gossips more ammunition. "But you won't be doing it alone. That's what you've been building here, community. People who'll help because they're grateful, not because they're paid. What if they're not grateful? What if they just take what I've given them and forget I exist?" "Some probably will. People are like that sometimes. But most won't. Most will remember." She was quiet for a while, staring at her hands. They were different hands than when she'd first arrived. Calloused now, nails broken, a scar across one knuckle where she'd caught it on a fence post. Working hands. "I sold my husband's house," she said finally, "the estate in San Francisco. Got a fraction of what it was worth because I needed cash fast, but it bought us another 3 months." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. This is more important than a house I never lived in anyway. It was always his, not mine. Just another thing I inherited without wanting." "What did you want?" She looked up at him, and he saw tears forming. "This. Exactly this. A place where I matter beyond my bank account, where people know my name and it means something other than that rich Chinese woman. where I can work beside people and feel like I'm building something real. You have that. For now. But when the money's gone, you'll still have it. You'll just have it while being broke, like the rest of us. This time when she laughed, it was real, tired and scared, but real. You make poverty sound almost appealing. It's not, but it's honest. And you wanted honesty, remember? That's what started all this. Yes, it is. She wiped her eyes. I should go. It's late. Where are you staying these days? Caleb realized he didn't actually know. She'd moved out of the hotel weeks ago. There's a room above the general store foundation. Klaus built it as a temporary office. I've been sleeping there. That can't be comfortable. It's not. But it's mine. I'm paying for it with labor instead of money, and somehow that makes it better. After she left, Caleb sat in the barn thinking about what she'd said. About being terrified of poverty. About not knowing how to be equal instead of wealthy. About wanting to matter beyond money. He understood that. He'd spent 7 years being defined by his failure, by what he didn't have, by what he'd lost. And now he was being defined by what he was building. It was a better feeling, but also more fragile. Failure as identity was solid, unchanging. Success as identity could be taken away. 6 months in, they hit a crisis that almost broke everything. A man named Carson showed up claiming one of the plots, the Yamazaki plot, was actually his. He had papers, old and questionable, but papers nonetheless. Said his father had owned the land before Wei Trading Company bought it, and the sale had been fraudulent. The Yamazakis had already built half a house. They'd invested everything they had, and now Carson was threatening legal action, demanding either the land or compensation they couldn't afford. Caleb met with Carson at what passed for a town square, really just a cleared area between building sites. The man was in his 40s, hard-faced, smelling like whiskey and old anger. My father died because of losing this land, Carson said. Drank himself to death over it. That Chinese bastard Wei stole it from him, and now I'm taking it back. The Yamazakis didn't steal anything. They bought it fair and square from Mrs. Wei, who inherited it from her husband. Don't care, it's mine by right. Your right died with your father. The land was sold legally, multiple times over. You got no claim. I got these papers. Carson slapped the documents on a board they were using as a table. And I got a lawyer who says I got a case. Caleb looked at the papers. They were old, faded, and he couldn't tell if they were legitimate or not. But legitimate or not, if Carson pushed this legally, it would tie up everything. The whole project would grind to a halt while lawyers argued. What do you want? He asked. My land, or $20,000. We don't have $20,000. Then I take the land. You do that, you destroy a family. The Yamazakis have children. They've worked themselves half to death on that plot. Not my problem. They shouldn't have bought stolen land. Caleb felt his temper rising, the same rage that had made him hit Webb months ago. But he forced it down. Violence wouldn't solve this. Give me a week, he said. Let me talk to Mrs. Wei, see what we can work out. 1 week. Then I file papers. Carson left, and Caleb stood there staring at the documents, feeling the weight of it. They'd come so far. They'd built so much. And now one angry man with questionable papers could tear it all down. He found Lian Hua at the school site, helping Miss Brennan paint window frames. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, her face growing paler as he talked. Is his claim legitimate? She asked when he finished. I don't know. Maybe. Doesn't matter much if he can tie us up in court for years. We can't pay him. I don't have 20,000. I barely have 20. I know. They sat in silence, both trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Finally, Lian Hua said, we could give him different land, not the Yamazaki plot, but something equivalent. We don't have anything equivalent that isn't claimed. Then we unclaim something. We take a loss somewhere else. And displace another family? How's that different from what Carson's doing? It's not, but at least we'd be the ones making the choice instead of having it forced on us. Caleb shook his head. There has to be another way, but there wasn't. They spent the next 3 days searching records, consulting with what passed for legal help in the territory, trying to find a loophole or a solution. Nothing worked. Carson's claim was shaky, but shaky enough to cause problems, and they didn't have the resources to fight it. On the 4th day, Tom came to find Caleb with an unexpected suggestion. What if we give him my plot? The old man said. What? No. Tom, you've already put work into... Not much work. I'm old. I don't need 12 acres. I can get by with less or just keep living in the workers' quarters. He shrugged. And it solves the problem. My plot's roughly equivalent to the Yamazaki land. Carson gets what he wants. The Yamazakis keep their house. Problem solved. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Why? What do you get out of it? Tom was quiet for a moment, looking out at the growing settlement. I get to watch this place come alive instead of watching it die in legal fights. I get to see families stay instead of being driven off by angry men with old grudges. He looked at Caleb directly. And I get to prove that we're actually different from the people who destroyed this valley in the first place. We put people before profit. We sacrifice for each other. That's worth more than any plot of land. Caleb felt his throat tighten. You sure? I'm sure. They presented the offer to Carson the next day. He grumbled, said it wasn't what he wanted, but eventually agreed. Tom signed over his claim, Carson got his land, and the crisis passed. The Yamazakis threw a celebration dinner for Tom, even though they could barely afford food for themselves. Half the settlement showed up, bringing whatever they had. It wasn't fancy, beans and bread and some tough meat Klaus had hunted, but it was real. Tom stood up halfway through the meal and raised his cup. To community, he said simply. Everyone echoed him. To community. And Caleb, watching Tom's weathered face, watching the Yamazaki's gratitude, watching all these people who'd come together despite having nothing, felt something he'd thought was gone forever. Pride. Not in what he owned, but in what they'd all built together. The months that followed were hard work and small victories. The general store opened with minimal inventory but maximum hope. The school got walls and a roof, and suddenly there were 8 children learning under Miss Brennan's patient instruction. More families arrived. Word had spread somehow, people telling people, hope multiplying across distance. Lianhua's money finally ran out completely on a cold morning in November. She came to tell Caleb with her account book showing 0 in every column. Well, she said, I'm officially poor. How's it feel? Terrifying, liberating, both at once. She laughed. I have no money, no safety net, no way to solve problems except with labor and creativity. It's horrible. But I'm happier than I've been in years, maybe ever. She'd claimed the last plot and started building her own house, working alongside Klaus and anyone else who had spare time. It was small, simple, nothing like the estate she'd sold, but it was hers in a way nothing had been before. Sarah had attached herself to Lianhua somewhere along the way, helping with construction, asking endless questions about China and business and what it was like to be a woman in a man's world. Lianhua answered everything honestly, holding nothing back, and Caleb watched his daughter grow bolder, more confident, more certain that she could be anything she wanted. One evening, working on Lianhua's roof while Sarah handed up shingles, Caleb asked, You ever regret it, giving up everything for this? Lianhua didn't answer right away, hammering in a nail before responding. Every day I regret something. Regret not standing up to my husband when he was alive. Regret not leaving sooner. Regret not finding this place years ago. She looked at him. But giving up wealth for this? No, never. Not even once. Even when you're hungry? Even then. Hunger passes. Loneliness doesn't. Sarah, who'd been quiet, spoke up. Are you lonely now? Lianhua smiled at her. No, little one. I'm not lonely anymore. Winter came hard and tested everything they'd built. 2 families gave up and left, unable to handle the cold and the work and the uncertainty. But the others stayed, huddling together, sharing resources, making it through. Caleb and Sarah moved out of the barn and into a small house Tom and Klaus had helped him build. It was nothing fancy, but it had a real roof and a stove that worked, and Sarah had her own room for the first time since they'd lost the ranch. The first night there, she asked him a question he'd been dreading. Do you miss Mama? Caleb thought about Rebecca, about the way she'd seen good in everything, about the promises he'd made and broken. Every day. Do you think she'd like what we're doing here? Yeah, sweetheart, I think she'd love it. Do you think she'd like Mrs. Wei? That was a more complicated question. Caleb thought about the woman who'd arrived in a black carriage offering to buy one night, and the woman who now worked beside everyone else with dirt under her nails and hope in her eyes. Yeah, he said. I think she would. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Do you like her, Mrs. Way? Of course I do. No, I mean, like her seats. Caleb felt his face heat. Sarah, it's okay if you do. I like her too. She's smart and she doesn't treat me like a baby, and she laughs at my jokes even when they're not funny. This is not a conversation we're having. Why not? Because you're 10 and I'm your father, and this is weird. You're the one making it weird. She had a point. Caleb took a breath. I care about her, a lot, but it's complicated. Why? Because people already talk about us. Because she was married to a man who hurt our family. Because we're partners in this project, and mixing business with personal feelings is a bad idea. Those are all adult reasons that don't make sense. They make perfect sense. Do you love her? The question hit him like a physical blow. Did he love Lianhua? He thought about the way she'd cried in his house that first night. The way she'd stood in the ruins of Morrison's place and committed to something impossible. The way she'd given up everything to build something that mattered. The way she made Sarah laugh and challenged Tom and worked until her hands bled without complaining. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe. It's too soon to tell. Mama would want you to be happy. I know she would. Then maybe stop making excuses and just be happy. Out of the mouths of children came uncomfortable truths. Spring arrived like a gift, warming the land, making things grow. The settlement that had been a dream, then a plan, then a construction site, finally started looking like an actual town. They named it New Haven, which Tom said was too obvious, but everyone else liked. 23 families now. 23 houses in various states of completion. A general store that was actually turning a small profit. A school with 12 students and plans to add a second room. A church. Or really a multi-purpose building that different groups used on different days, because nobody could agree on one faith, but everyone agreed they needed somewhere to gather. Caleb stood on the same ridge where he'd brought Lianhua almost a year ago, looking down at what they'd built. Behind him, footsteps on rock announced her arrival. You do this a lot, she said, coming to stand beside him. Come up here and look. Helps me think. About what? About how impossible this seemed. About how many things could have gone wrong. About how we're actually doing it. We're not done yet. No, but we're close enough to see what it could be. They stood in silence, watching smoke rise from chimneys, watching people move between buildings, watching life happen in a place that had been dead. Thank you, Lianhua said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For seeing past the money to the person underneath. For showing me there was another way to live. You did the same for me. Showed me I could still build something after losing everything. We both needed saving, I think, just in different ways. Caleb turned to face her fully. Can I ask you something? Always? That first night, when you made the offer to buy one evening in my home, if I'd said yes immediately, taken the deal without question, what would you have done? Lianhua considered this. Honestly, I probably would have spent one awkward evening making small talk, paid you the money, and left. And I'd have stayed lonely for the rest of my life, convinced that connection was impossible. And now I know better. Now I know that the best things can't be bought. They have to be built, together, by people who choose each other, despite every reason not to. Is that what we did? Choose each other? Yes. Though it took us a while to realize it. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. He took her hand, her work-roughened, scarred hand, and held it gently. The town talks, he said. They'll talk more if this becomes something. Let them talk. I'm tired of living my life based on what other people think. Sarah asked me if I loved you. What did you tell her? That I didn't know, that it was too soon. And now, is it still too soon? Caleb thought about the year they'd spent building this place, building this life, building something neither of them could have done alone. Thought about the way she challenged him and frustrated him and made him want to be better than he was. Thought about Rebecca's voice in his head saying, "Don't let the world make you hard," and realized that Lianhua had helped him stay soft in all the ways that mattered. No, he said, it's not too soon anymore. She smiled and it transformed her entire face. Good, because I've loved you for months and was getting tired of waiting for you to catch up. He laughed, and then she was kissing him, and the valley spread out below them full of life and possibility, and everything they'd built together from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. What do we do now? Now we keep building, keep growing, keep making this place into something that matters. Together, together. They walked back down to New Haven hand in hand, and if people noticed, if they talked, Caleb found he didn't care. Let them talk. He'd spent too long worrying about other people's opinions. A year later, New Haven had 40 families, a school with 2 teachers, a general store that was expanding, and a reputation as the place where people came when they needed a second chance. Tom served as unofficial town council, settling disputes and making sure newcomers understood the community values. Miss Brennan had gotten married to one of the Morrison sons, and they were expecting their first child. The Yamazakis had started a farming cooperative that was revolutionizing how everyone thought about irrigation and crop rotation. And Caleb and Lianhua stood together at what had become a monthly community gathering, watching children play in the dusty square while adults talked and laughed and argued and lived. Sarah, now almost 12, was teaching younger children how to read, already showing signs of becoming a teacher like Miss Brennan. She'd stopped asking Caleb about her 2 small dresses because Lianhua had taught her to sew, and she made her own now, each one a little better than the last. I'm going to marry you, Lianhua said suddenly. Caleb nearly dropped his coffee. Excuse me? That came out wrong. I mean to say, I would like to marry you if you're interested. You're proposing? Yes, I know it's unconventional for a woman to ask, but nothing about us has been conventional. No, it hasn't. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd transformed from a lonely widow in silk to a community builder in work clothes, and felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Yeah, I'm interested. That's not very romantic. You want romantic? You showed up offering to buy one night and instead bought into a whole lifetime. You gave up wealth for work, isolation for community, emptiness for meaning. You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. She laughed, eyes bright with tears. When you put it like that, they married in the multi-purpose building with the whole town watching. Tom stood up for Caleb, Sarah for Lianhua. The ceremony was simple, the celebration loud and chaotic and perfect. That night, in the house they'd decided to share, Lianhua's, because it was newer and bigger, and Sarah insisted, Caleb pulled out something he'd been saving. What's this? Lianhua asked, looking at the old photograph. My parents and my grandparents, taken on the original Thorne homestead, the one your husband bought. He paused. The one we're rebuilding. She studied the photo, seeing the pride in their faces, the hope. They'd be proud of what you've done. What we've done. I couldn't have done this alone. Neither could I. She set the photo carefully on the mantel. We'll put it here, a reminder of where we came from and where we're going. And where are we going? Forward. Together. Into whatever comes next. 5 years after that night in Caleb's kitchen, when everything had seemed impossible, New Haven was a thriving town. The valley that had been empty was full of life again. People had come back, brought friends, built futures. Caleb stood on the ridge one last time with Lianhua beside him and Sarah, now 16 and planning to attend teacher's college, on his other side. Below them, lights were beginning to come on as sunset approached, making the town look like stars had fallen to earth. Was it worth it? Sarah asked. Giving up everything to build this? Lianhua answered before Caleb could. I didn't give up anything that mattered. I traded loneliness for love, wealth for meaning, transaction for legacy. She looked at Caleb. That's not sacrifice, that's wisdom. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders, around his daughter's shoulders, and watched the town they'd built come alive with evening light. He thought about the man he'd been, desperate, angry, ready to sell anything to survive, and the man he'd become, part of something larger than himself, connected to people who mattered, building something that would outlast him. Yeah, he said quietly. It was worth it. Because in the end, that's what life came down to. Not what you accumulated, but what you built. Not what you owned, but who you loved. Not what you took, but what you gave. He'd learned that from Rebecca, forgotten it in grief, and remembered it through Lianhua. And now he'd spend the rest of his life teaching it to Sarah, to New Haven, to anyone who'd listen. Wealth wasn't money. Wealth was this: standing on a ridge at sunset with people you loved, watching a community thrive because you chose to build instead of hoard, to connect instead of isolate, to transform a transaction into something that actually mattered. Below them, in houses built from hope and stubborn determination, families gathered for dinner. Children laughed. Plans were made for tomorrow and next week and next year. Life happened, messy and beautiful and real. And on the ridge, three people who'd found each other against all odds stood together, watching the light fade and the stars emerge, knowing they'd helped create something that would outlast them all. Not a fortune, not an empire. Just a place where people belonged, where second chances were real, and where loneliness was finally defeated by the simple act of choosing each other again and again, every day. That was wealth beyond measure. That was legacy. That was enough.